Welcome to the CTO Studio. Today I talk to Jonathan LaCour, CTO of Mission, a managed cloud consulting service. They're based here in Los Angeles. We're in Los Angeles today. We have an incredible conversation about all issues relating to cloud migration, and we talk about owning your own data. So listen.
I have a wonderful electronic invention I want you to see. It looks something like this.
Welcome to the CTO Studio. I'm your host, Etienne de Bruin. The CTO Studio is where we chat with CTOs building amazing products with incredible teams. Have you chatted with a CTO lately? Jonathan.
Good morning.
Welcome to the CTO Studio.
Thank you.
This is our roadshow. In other words, the very first time we've moved.
And since I'm, first, does this make me like an opening act, or am I the headliner? That's really what I want to know.
I'm going to say you're the alpha release.
There we go. That works.
And also, because we're batching these interviews, which is a little secret, you may not be the first episode from this session.
We'll see. I'm going to try to be real strong, and we'll see how it goes.
Yes, because the stronger you are, the later you'll be in there.
That's right.
So we're at Mission.
Yeah.
So I got to know Mission when you were Relium, and I had a fantastic time sort of negotiating with Mission to help us sponsor our 0111 CTO conference.
That's right.
And that's where I got to meet you, and you gave a talk, which prompted me to go and rewrite some code I had written just that week before.
See, that fills me with joy, because anytime I can inspire somebody to write code, especially somebody who should be writing code on a regular basis.
Yes, I have been coding since I was at the tender age of 13.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
My dad was worried that I was coding too much, and so he bought me video games.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
So he was really like, can you just chill out and stop writing this accounting package and just play Pac-Man? So he bought me O'Reilly's Mine and Dig Dug. And
well, that's surely going to enrapture you, right? Dig Dug.
The good news was that it took those cassettes so long to load the games that I just ended up coding in between game sessions.
There you go.
So we're at Mission, right?
Yes.
And Jonathan has made this studio available to us. Eric and I have set this up, and so we're going to spend the day recording here. Thank you very much, Mission.
Of course.
And I wanted to dig in a little bit as to sort of what Mission does and how you became CTO at Mission. I know, sort of thinking back fondly of DreamHost.
That's right.
That was the first thing that caught my eye, was that you were you CTO at DreamHost?
I was a senior vice president at DreamHost. They didn't really have a C-suite so much. So, basically yes.
Back in those days though, CTO was sort of a novelty, right? I mean, it wasn't really a well-defined officer.
Yeah, well, and DreamHost is one of those, it's a very quirky place, right? So honestly, I'm surprised we didn't just invent some sort of crazy title, right? It was a pretty crazy title.
So tell me about your journey to sort of getting to where you are today.
Okay, well, I'll give you kind of the shortened background history on me a little bit, and similar to you, right? I got into computing really, really young. My father is actually a Presbyterian minister. Which exactly, that's the reaction that you should have. But he was also an engineer, and he went to Georgia Tech, which I eventually did as well. And he worked on the space program and the cooperative program. So he's always been a technical guy. And in the early days of my childhood, he would bring home his computer that he had at his office. And by bring home his portable computer, it was a Mac Plus, the one with the little handle on it. So that's where I started to code, actually, was on a little Mac Plus, and started off with just like HyperCard, and then, Pascal, and eventually C and other things.
So what city is this?
I was growing up in Miami, Florida. Okay. So, I got into computing way back then and have been kind of into computing ever since. I started writing code professionally in high school. And kind of through a girl I was dating, started working at a enterprise healthcare business. So I ended up learning Python back in the like 1.4 era of Python. So I've been using Python forever. And yeah, I kind of came up doing that, and we did a lot of Java back then as well because that was supposed to be the thing. And then we kind of threw most of that away and went back to Python. And went through a couple acquisitions with them. Got bought by an enterprise document management business, so I got heavy into enterprise in the early days. And then I decided I really wanted to kind of make a hard right and kind of turn towards doing a startup. Ended up doing a business with my family, my sister and my brother-in-law, and we did kind of a SaaS application in the photography space.
Was that ShootQ?
ShootQ, and they're still around. We kind of did it from scratch, bootstrapped. My brother-in-law had written some software for himself to run his own photography business, very poorly. Impressive that he did it, right? He's an amazing photographer, and now he's actually quite a capable programmer. But back then, he was like, "Hey, can you help me?" I was like, "Here's a book, right? PHP and MySQL, right? Figure it out." And he did, and in very novel and interesting ways. He wrote the software that was pretty cool, and I came in and was like, "Hey, look, this could be a product, but we need to redo it, right, in a way that we can actually make it multi-tenant and run it as a SaaS application in the cloud." This is like early days of cloud, so. We built out this kind of cloud native app and ShootQ, and we grew it, became kind of like an industry standard, and sold it to a company out here in LA. And that's how I met Simon Anderson, who is the CEO of Mission. He actually was the CMO at the company that bought us. And then, Simon and I have been working together ever since. He went off and became CEO at DreamHost. I picked up my family. We moved from Atlanta, where we were living at the time, and came out to LA to join DreamHost. I had 5 different titles in 7 years there. So kind of did a lot of different things, including building out cloud infrastructure, running product, and engineering management, all that good stuff. And then when Simon headed off to, he became an entrepreneur in residence at a private equity firm called Great Hill Partners out of Boston. And I worked with him on a thesis for the managed cloud space. And that's how we ended up at Mission. So I basically ran the due diligence process from a technical perspective with the private equity firm and with Simon. And we identified this company here in LA called Relium, really sharp group, ended up acquiring them. And then I came into CTO shortly thereafter. And now we bought 2 other businesses, one other one in LA and one in Boston. And all combined together now we're about a 100-person company. That's in about a year's worth of effort, going from about a 20-person company to about a 100-person company. And we help companies make the move to AWS. And if they're already on AWS, we help them make the most of it. So that's the quick history of me and how I got to where we are.
I love it. I want to kind of stick to the growth from 20 to 100 people.
Yeah.
So as CTO, how has your team changed?
So it's funny, because we're a business that does a lot of professional services and consulting, there actually, a lot of the technical resources work on a different team than mine. My team sort of represents the glue to hold things together. And we have platform and product is what I do and what my team does. And so our team kind of went from being 0 when I started. It was just me, right? And I pulled in a bunch of, kind of the smartest, best resources on the team that I could identify that would be good for a fit for what we are doing. And what the platform team really does is all about optimizing for efficiency and finding ways to automate our business, right? So we kind of view we manage customer infrastructure on AWS, right? And we want to do that in an efficient and effective way, make sure that everything is fully automated, that we have a great deal of insight, and that all of our 24/7 engineers who work on another team have all the tools and the resources they need to get deep insights into what's going on in a customer's, AWS account.
So as CTO, you're building the products and the tools that enables your product engineers or your
service delivery team.
Team to do that quicker, faster,
That's
and more
right.
efficiently.
They're our number one customer, right?
Yes.
Is basically the folks who are the technical team that's delivering service to our end user, our end customer. We want them to be hyper efficient, right? And so, a lot of people solve in this space, in the managed services space and in the cloud consulting space, they solve problems with what I like to call meat, right? People. They just throw people at the problem. We're technologists, right? We want to solve the problems with technology whenever possible, and enable our smart people to handle the things the technology sometimes can't, right? So if they're doing things that are we have regular cadence meetings with the service delivery team, and it's like, look, when are you picking up a pencil? Which in for a technical team, that is, when are you firing up the terminal, having to manually run commands? Like that's you shouldn't be in the shell necessarily to running the same 50 different tools all the time, right? We should automate as much of this as possible.
But also it's helpful to have things done manually until you can automate it.
Yeah,
right?
manual till it hurts, and then when it hurts, tell us about it, and we'll automate it for you.
And so, as CTO, are you involved in a lot of the client-facing solution engineering stuff?
So I spend a lot of time working with the sales team, and being an executive sponsor, going out on customer calls and trying to figure out, hey, how can we help you? And it is part of my job to really understand and grasp the full breadth and depth of what AWS has to offer, and really all of the hyperscale cloud providers.
My head's dizzy every time I log into my console.
Yeah, I mean, and it should be, right? Like the notion that any one person or one business can be, an expert on all of AWS is sort of nuts, right? But it's an exciting time right now as a technologist, because you're constantly able to, especially with AWS at your fingertips, right? You can dive in and do some really cool stuff. I'm doing a lot of AI ML kind of stuff this last couple of weeks with, especially around image and video processing. And it's an
using AWS tools.
Using AWS tools, but also, interestingly, a lot of times AWS, what they really do is they're going out into the marketplace and finding open source and kind of industry standard things and operationalizing them and making them into services. And they get a lot of grief for this, because especially from certain pockets of open source communities going, oh, they're taking advantage of us. And it's like, look, they contribute a lot back, and ultimately what people actually want is they want the value, right? They want to be able to deliver real things on top of this software. And so that's just their model, right? And it makes life really easy. The AI ML space in particular is pretty chaotic right now, because, there's hundreds of different tools, right? From, MXNet and TensorFlow and all these different things you have to understand. And Amazon is really trying to make it such that you don't have to be a data scientist to be able to do AI ML.
I think that's the part that gets me most excited these days. I mean, originally with cloud, I remember with my startup, we took this huge foray into managed services at Rackspace.
Yep.
And I'll never forget those 4 or 5 exciting days of anticipation as they were sort of provisioning your system.
Oh, yeah.
And you get that shell login and you're like,
it's real.
And to this day, even when it is an instance I fire up and I get to log in, I'm like, this is just every time it's just
magic.
feels amazing. So then you have this whole auto scaling and provisioning and IPs and everything that sort of all those sort of Unix networking system things that get abstracted. Then you go into containers and sort of and the next level of abstraction, and then I feel like this one where we can start leveraging, the data that Amazon has, the rules that they have sort of accumulated and all of that. Now I feel we're back into we've come around the dark side of the moon, and now we can start getting excited about what they have learned and leveraging that in our own applications.
Yeah, it's really true. And it's funny, the oldest AWS service is S3, and it is, by all accounts, most people find it pretty boring, right? Because it's storage, right? You stick blobs of data into a bucket, and there you go, object storage. But as it turns out, it's actually one of the most exciting services that there is, because they have now integrated it in so many different ways that if you put your data in there, you can actually use it as a data lake and do all sorts of really cool, interesting stuff against it, right? You can run, kind of big data analytics workloads against it. And, one of the ones that I always tell to people who, like me, are developers, engineers who understand they understand relational databases, for example. It's like, hey, look, did you know that you can put plain text files up in S3 and pay almost nothing to host them? and then you can run SQL queries against them. And that blows people's minds. They have no idea how that's even possible, but AWS does it. It's a pretty cool thing.
And that is services inside of the AWS family, right? It's not
right.
Like I know there's Snowflake and
yeah, there's lots of great ecosystem partners as well, right? Like you know, it only gets even more exciting when you jump outside of just the AWS core services, but even if you just stick with core AWS services, there's a lot you can do.
And do you sort of, as CTO and as you're managing the growth of your company's technology strategy and tools, do you have are you principled in the sense that you are going to try and stick with AWS as far as you can? Or are you sort of incorporating all these third-party services and systems?
So I think the answer is yes on both, right? My job as a CTO is to pick best of breed, but it's also to have a good cohesive technology strategy. And as a partner of AWS, it is our job to understand the AWS, kind of platform as well as possible. So we always give the AWS, solutions a fair shake, right? And understand them deeply and make sure that, look, if this is going to work for us, that's what we should use. But I also want to know what's out there, right? What other options are there in open source and, commercial that we can plug and play into the ecosystem. So we ended up with a mix, right? Some good examples are, so AWS provides CloudFormation, right? Which is a wonderful kind of infrastructure as code kind of platform. And we do use it. But we have decided to use Terraform for most of our work instead. And the reason for that is because it met our needs better. But it wasn't because we just picked it without looking at CloudFormation. It's because we kind of learned both deeply and made the decision on when to use the right tool for the job.
And do you, I want to kind of talk about that. When you are so overtly pushing AWS as, not pushing, but as a managed service provider for AWS, how do you brand that so that clients don't feel like, well, you're always going to be
just pushing that services? Yeah, I mean, to me, ultimately,
as a CTO, I would say,
yeah. Well, whenever I go to a customer engagement, I'm more than happy to tell them about the pitfalls of certain AWS services, right? They are the market leader, no question about it. And not only in market share, but in terms of kind of breadth and depth and capability and all of that. But that doesn't mean they're perfect, right? And the great thing about being an AWS partner is they're pretty customer obsessed. That's kind of one of their values. And so as a customer, and a partner, we can go to them and we can tell them, look, this bit of your service could really use some improvement. And I will tell my customers that, right? If there is a better solution for you, we will tell you, right? So it's also about picking the right service, right? Because sometimes there's about 100 different ways to solve a particular problem, even just with AWS. And so helping them not pick the one that's going to cost them the most money, that may make us the most money, right? But it's not the right solution. So we have to build that trust and credibility. And I think a big part of that is by just being completely honest and transparent about they're not perfect, but they are very receptive to your feedback. And here's a good alternative in cases where, it's not a good fit for you.
So I love on the Mission website, I went to the resources section and I saw the spend, the AWS spend spreadsheet.
Yes.
And I know right when we sold our company, I feel like I left the stage right before this incredible boom. It was just 2015.
Okay, yeah.
And I had redundancy in multiple clouds. The Rackspace cloud back then, and then AWS. But I did realize that there was this tsunami of spend calculation, cost calculation coming down, and I know as much as AWS interface tried to make the projections sort of easy to understand, it was still like this whole other side of my brain that had to start thinking and computing cycles and all that stuff.
Remember when I said that I would point out when AWS has shortcomings? I will routinely tell my customers, look, this is a space that unless you are an absolute and utter expert in how AWS bills you, you're going to have trouble, right? Figuring out where your money's going can be quite intimidating, especially, earlier we were talking about sort of the magic of spinning up a VM and for someone who's been in technology for a long time, it's like, wow, it's so cool. I can run a little, I can push an API call and boom, I have a server within a minute. Amazing, right? all on the same token, so do all your developers on your team, and you're getting billed for that by the minute. And it's like, wow, what is going on here? Where is all my money going? Why is it going there? And AWS gives you tools to handle this, but they're not super easy to use, and they take a lot of education and training. So yeah, Mission does have on our website, we have like an Excel spreadsheet of all things, which you would think like,
I saw it.
But it's actually a great tool and resource. The nice thing about it is because it's a spreadsheet, everyone's like, oh, but it's not cloud-based. Yeah, but here's the thing. When you're talking to your CFO and you want to tell them about your spend and what the calculations are going to be when you're thinking about making the move to AWS, sending them an email attachment with an Excel spreadsheet is probably the best. That's a godsend to you, because if you
love language.
That's right. If you send them like, oh, I use this specialized tool and here's no, they don't want to want that.
I recently prototyped an app for a friend, and it was in the real-time shopping sort of Facebook Live meets Etsy meets QVC. So
cool.
sort of it was a really cool app. And I decided it was time to implement Redis or some sort of memcache. And I'd never used Elasticache before, and decided, well, great, let's just use Elasticache. And oh my goodness, I felt like an idiot, but the cost was shocking. So what we did then was we just installed Redis on an instance, and we just kind of used that.
Yeah, sometimes that's like, and the funny thing is AWS will actually directly tell you sometimes. It's like, look, maybe the managed service isn't the right solution for you. Maybe you should just install it on EC2, right? We've done that for customers. We have customers that use, for example, RDS and Elasticache. They're using the managed service, right? And they have enough scale where it makes sense, right? And there's other people who it's like, look, if you have if you're doing prototype or dev test, maybe it makes sense just to install it on the instance, right? You just got to be flexible. I think that's never going to change. Needing that flexibility, but you can really get bit if you're not careful on the cost front, for sure.
Yeah, I when I get that little alarm email from Amazon, my heart starts racing.
Absolutely, it's it's funny. One of my favorite features of the AWS ecosystem are those like notifications where you can go in and be like, hey, look, if my bill is approaching, X, shoot me an email, right? Or if something is going haywire.
Let me ask you 2 rookie questions, if I may.
All right, rookie it up.
When I choose to deploy some service from Amazon, I just feel like I'm randomly picking a region. Is there a science to the regions?
Yes, there is a science to the regions.
Should I visualize that there's an actual building with these machines in it?
You can if that helps you, right? If it makes you feel better or sleep easier. But look, realistically, regions are about a couple different things. So first of all, every region is priced differently. So that's something that a lot of people don't realize, right? Every service that is available in a region may have a different price point than it would have in, say, US East or US West or whatever. And the reason for that is because power costs, different, network costs different in each different place globally, right? So cost is a factor when you're picking a region. And then in addition, there's geographic and, the speed of light, right? So if you have users in Europe, you probably don't want to be using US East 1, exclusively. And there's also not every service is available in every region. A lot of people don't know that either. The core services are all available in every region, but not every service is available in every region. So when you're picking a region, or really you should be picking multiple regions, but you should do so based upon a combination of factors, right? Price, which services are available and which ones do I need, and where are my users? And that's it.
So, and is there an easy way to see that?
Yeah, if you actually go on AWS's website and navigate through the maze, there are a couple of pages where you can go in and see kind of, for example, EC2 instance pricing on a per region basis. Our spreadsheet actually is pretty useful for this as well. There's lots of tools out there. AWS does provide some. They have something called the simple pricing calculator, simple monthly calculator, I believe. And they're working on some new tools to help for cost estimation on their website. So there's lots of tools out there. Visualizing it is difficult, and there are so many different levers that you can kind of, push and pull to change your price that it makes it a little bit difficult. But there are tools, and there are also partners.
Yes, of course. Can we just float the little Mission banner across the YouTube. I am wearing a T-shirt.
Yeah.
And I told you this morning it was unsolicited. I mean, you didn't ask me to do it.
No, I didn't.
I was going to wear my 7 CTO shirt.
Which, I probably should have worn a 7 CTO shirt.
I mean, that would have been really cool. But maybe it's too early in our relationship for that.
Yeah,
I mean, I hardly know you.
Well, I have to say, this Mission logo is pretty attractive. And that is quite the nice T-shirt. So
It is a beautiful, I really love the O.
The dynamic O,
sort of
we
the
call it.
infinite, the dynamic O.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's cool. It's sort of like this melding of the relationship between us and AWS and us and our customer.
What
right?
percentage of that logo and name came from you?
Oh wow! Well,
was it intent? So let me just maybe ask you this, if it's okay. Yeah. The whole rebranding and branding exercise. I mean, especially it's one thing to do it for a startup where you're, how to be awesome kind of books where you're like, okay, my vision, my branding board and all that. But man, for an existing company to do that, I mean,
it's a big challenge, and you can spend a lot of money hiring, firms that do this, and they do. Look, by all accounts, they do a great job, right? We worked with one back when I was at DreamHost. We did a spin out called Ink Tank, and we hired a firm that specializes in branding and naming, and they came up with the name and the design and the logo and stuff, and it cost us an arm and a leg, but it was really, really good. But going through that process a couple of different times, when we did Mission, we were like, in this space, we want to get a great knock it out of the park brand, but we feel like we don't really need necessarily to go out and hire one of these firms. We actually ended up bringing in one of Simon's, connections, and now he is our CMO, right? So he kind of really proved himself during the rebrand process. And while he was kind of consulting with us, we brought together kind of representative cross section of the company, and we went through a kind of a multi-week process. We did it in very, very quick kind of succession to kind of think about, what is it that we're trying to convey with the brand. And the great thing about the name Mission is it conveys a lot of other, thoughts that come into your head. Mission control, mission command, right? I'm on a mission. What's your mission, right? So there's, we really did think about, we went through this process of like picking out images that we felt captured what it is that we do for people. And I can't remember who it was. One of the people in the kind of session put up a photo of like a NASA mission control, right? With, all those screens up, and you could, they're supporting the astronauts on their mission. And that's what we do for our customers, right? We're the experts. We're the, have you ever seen the movie Spider-Man Homecoming?
Yes.
I know this is taking a really strange turn.
I'm loving it. I just saw Spider-Verse.
Oh, so good. Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Yeah. But Spider-Man Homecoming, there's a scene in there where, kind of Peter Parker's best friend, he's like, can I be your guy in the chair? Do you remember that scene?
Oh, I do.
And we're the guy in the chair.
Wow,
that's what Mission is. And so that's what we really wanted to convey to people. It's like, hey, and that's why if you look at the logo, we usually have a tagline underneath it, let's achieve yours. And that's the whole thing. Like, this is new to me being at a company where the end goal is our customer's end goal, right? Now, that's not to say all the other companies I haven't been at haven't cared about their customers. They have, but we were producing products. And so our end goal was the customer's end goal, but in building them something to help them achieve it. But in this case, it's a little bit different because we're really having to deeply understand all of our customers' businesses and jump in and work with them. So all of this really went into that branding process, and it was really fun. When the name came out, we're like, can we do that? It's a pretty common word.
Well, that's my next question. Is it to pick such a common word?
We had backups. And then we went to legal and we're like, hey, look, go do a search. Tell us if we can do this. And they came back and were like, look, it's defensible. There's no one in your space who is using this, right? There's a tortilla company, right? So we're not the tortilla company, right? And there's like a clothing business and so on. So, but in technology, there wasn't anybody. And we were like, we could make up a word and, hope people know what it means, or we could pick a word that has deep meaning.
And it's a word that every single company has a mission.
Yeah.
So you're immediately building that connection point.
Yep.
The second rookie question I had was around Google Cloud, Amazon, Azure, what, as a CTO, if I know a lot of projects are cloud migration projects.
Yep.
So how do I decide which cloud to be in?
It's a great question, and even which clouds to be in, right? So you might have a multi-cloud strategy, and ultimately for me, it comes down to picking the best tool for the job. It's like any other kind of exploration that a CTO will undergo when you're picking the kind of programming language and runtime that you're going to build your application with, or multiple, right? Which database are you going to use? Which whatever it happens to be. It's the same kind of exploration. And the way I like to help people understand kind of the hyperscale cloud providers is ultimately what you're looking for is you're looking for someone who is going to provide you with as many shortcuts as possible to get to market, right? So if I'm a startup, that's what it's all about, time to market. How can I get to market? And sort of the name of the game with that, with the hyperscale providers these days are what they call them managed services. We do managed services as well, but it's kind of a different way. A service where you're not getting down to the bare metal or even to virtual machine level, right? Starting to think about how can I reduce my management burden as much as possible and get to market. So things like on Amazon RDS, right? All of the hyperscale providers have kind of serverless, functions as a service, whatever you want to call it, offerings as well. Managed containers, right? That's a huge aspect of it, managed databases. And so that's, I think, phase one is sort of determining what your needs are from a technology perspective and like what things could a cloud provider do for me that I won't have to do. Cost is, of course, a concern. But if you're, if time to market is your number one concern, then, probably go with features and breadth. And that road will almost always lead you to AWS because they have the most of those, right now. Now, if you have specialized, things, each hyperscale provider, everyone's like, well, let's just go do a cost by cost comparison, right? And they think that it's mostly a procurement issue. Picking a cloud provider shouldn't be a procurement issue if you are, building new things. If you are running kind of legacy software, it's a procurement problem, right? I've got, an SAP workload that is, a huge monolithic application that I'm going to, forklift up into a cloud provider. Procurement is your problem, right? Pricing is your problem.
Yes.
Go figure out what's the cheapest place to do it and between the big guys and do that. And it's more complex than that, but the vast majority, in my experience of our customers, that's not what they're asking. What they're asking for is, where can I give myself a leg up? How can I make myself more agile, more capable of delivering, to my customers more quickly? And then it gets a little bit different because the cloud providers have differentiated services. So if you're wanting to do AI ML, for example, there are definitely leaders in that space, but it depends on the type of AI and ML that you're trying to do, right? And if you, for example, want to do, you have specific like workloads that maybe Windows workloads, for example, you can definitely do it on AWS. AWS does a great job, but Microsoft, of course, is going to have some sort of advantage in that space. So it, to me, it's like understand the different providers and what their strengths and weaknesses are, map them to yours, and then make your choice. But there's a lot of factors.
Yeah, and I can imagine that your team, the comfort levels in your team and what they're used to and what the DevOps culture is also needs to be considered.
Yeah, absolutely, right?
Like I've never ever touched Azure before in my life. Like I don't even know where to go.
It's funny, that's true. If you go out in the market and you look for, team members and you're growing out your DevOps, staff, that is a huge challenge, right? Finding people with the right experience. Now, at the same time, look, if you have, as you know, most technologists can pick up anything if you give them the right amount of time. But again, time to market, we just talked about it. I do think that there's a reason that Mission focuses heavily on AWS right now, and it's because they are the unquestioned leader in the space. There's more people using AWS. There's more businesses who are interested in moving to AWS. They have the largest catalog of services. They are definitely an innovator in the space. Their price points are really great, and the talent pool is good, right? And I remember one of the arguments we had about 4 or 5 years ago when there was this movement of bare metal versus cloud services. And again, this is more in the startup space.
is there ever a case for just firing up your own server farm and just, virtualizing that and just...
Sure. I mean, a lot of it does also come down to core competencies, right? Like if that's something you're great at, I right now I would tend to say there's very rarely a case where I would encourage anyone to do that. But there are certainly cases, right? So one of the canonical examples that people cite is Dropbox, right? They're like, oh, Dropbox moved out of AWS and they saved millions of dollars. It's like, this is actually true. They did do that. But here's the thing. Dropbox has a workload that is very, very high scale in a single dimension, which is massive amounts of storage, right? They have compute for sure, right? They have network, they have other things as well going on. But fundamentally, Dropbox is a storage business, and they have massive, massive amounts of storage. So, of course, they can go out and at the scale that they have, they can go buy hardware and provision it and manage it themselves and probably save money. You're probably not Dropbox, right? So especially if you're a startup, I don't think there's anything wrong with having a couple of servers in a rack, somewhere, maybe in your basement, tinkering around, right, for dev test, right? There's nothing wrong with that per se. But fundamentally, we're talking about pretty small numbers now when you're using AWS for doing development. And I don't know. There are cases, but for the most part, there are cases of extremely high scale, right, where that makes sense. And most businesses don't have that scale, especially in a single dimension. That's the other factor.
Yeah. Do you see CTOs do you see like a flawed thinking sometimes in when you're dealing? So I'm assuming you deal a lot with CTOs, right?
Yeah, I communicate a fair amount with CTOs.
And what are some of the flaws, or maybe in their traditional thinking, that you tend to have the same conversation over and over about, well, this is actually what it is, or you're thinking of it in terms of the early 2000s, but this is what it's become. Like, what are some of those? And I particularly want to help our audience maybe sort of think through new ways of thinking about where the cloud is going and why you should be migrating and betting, more on it.
So it's funny. Several things jump directly into my head when you ask this question, and a lot of it comes down to the fact that as technologists, as CTO, we tend to think about things from a technology perspective, right? Which is good. That's part of our job. But we also tend to try to solve problems from a technology perspective, and oftentimes we'll go deeper than we need to, right? So in the past, when I was building, out companies and building out, things, I would start from, the bottom up, right? And find technologies that I could use to build on top of. And I would know fully in deep, intimate detail my entire stack. And these days, there's so much competition and so much innovation and activity going on that a CTO's job is really to help deliver value quickly. And if you're too obsessed with controlling every aspect of your technology stack, you can slow yourself down. And so one of the big challenges I hear from people is they'll say, well, I don't want to be locked in with a cloud provider. So to me, this is a fallacy. It's a false thinking mindset, because what you're telling yourself is, it's, when I'm successful, I don't want to be locked in. It's like, cool, when you're successful, let's have that conversation. But today, you're not there yet, right? This is not a problem for you. The problem for you is you have competition, you have people breathing down your neck, you need to innovate, and you need to get to market more quickly. You need to deliver value to your customers. You need to be focused on your product. So one of the things I really encourage CTOs to do when they're going through an exercise of thinking about how to, think about the cloud is start to align yourself with your product team. Now, sometimes CTOs control the product team. In my case, I do. And in the last couple of jobs I have, I think that's a very good idea.
I love it.
But if you don't, sometimes it's on, marketing, sometimes it's a separate, it could be under the revenue officer sometimes. It really depends. But align yourselves with them and understand the pain points that they're trying to solve for the customer. Gain empathy for your customer, and then think, okay, my customer does not care that I am really great at, managing a storage cluster. They don't care. What your customer cares about is the end value you're trying to deliver to them. So if you shift your mindset and start to think top down from how can I help deliver that value to my customer, then you stop thinking so much about, well, I can eke out an extra 6% performance, or maybe if I manage my own, database, right? Maybe you can, or maybe you can save money. Who knows? But are you going to get to market and provide value? Redeploy all of those great people on making your product better, right? And if you do reach Dropbox scale and you're killing it and you want to save millions of dollars by building out your own infrastructure, great. Go down that boondoggle later. Don't do it now, right?
I have seen the difference between CTOs who are product focused and have that voice of customer in their heads, versus the ones who are, technically more purist, I would say, and sort of more, well, we're going to be classical about our approach around technology.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, people would often assume it's like, oh, it's CTOs who have been CTOs for a long time. And I haven't found that to be true necessarily, right? I found in, talking to CTOs kind of a great mix, right? You'll find people who are relatively new and they think, oh, it's because I'm a technologist that I've got this job. And so I need to be, advising that we build everything and we can do it better and And it's like, no.
Yeah, I
right?
totally agree with that.
But you will also find some people who have been doing it for a long time who just haven't broken out yet.
And so do you have, just to kind of close that, do you have advice for CTOs who find that they're struggling with their product teams and or are at loggerheads with them constantly, or are unable to think that way in the executive sync up? Like, I mean, you could say go sit and shadow your customer success team. Or
I think, look, you should make every effort internally first, right? I think that is ultimately the best path. If you can build alliances out with your product team and really help them understand that your job is ultimately to build a technology strategy that will enable your customer. And the product team's job is to come up with, products that are going to enable the end customer. So you have the same mission, right? You have the same goal. And if you can convey that to them and align, and ultimately the person who's going to probably have to budge more on their philosophy is probably the CTO. And that's, I think, where it's the most difficult, especially for technologists. We tend to have flexibility is sometimes not our biggest strength, right?
Yes. Putting it mildly.
Yeah, I was like, how can I express this?
Flexibility is sometimes not our biggest strength.
Right. That's a very political way to put it.
I think the challenge also is it's a sort of a vicious cycle where you aren't viewed that way either by your fellow C-suite.
Yeah.
And then it makes it really tough to then step into that gap and have that voice. I mean, I was on a team once where I had to tell the CPO, hey, don't just be talking business to the business people now. Right. I want to be part of these customer interviews. I have to be a part of what's happening.
That's right.
And for the CPO, it was, oh, geez, I didn't even contemplate that you would want to be a part of that.
Yeah, there's a really great group out there that has a whole kind of philosophy and a series of training and such. And I'll give them a little plug called Pragmatic Marketing. And if you may have heard of them, they've been around for quite some time. I've done the training myself. I've delivered, I had people who work for me go through it as well. And I think getting a CTO to go to one of those things is actually quite valuable because it gives them this notion of like, look, start to think about what's going to really unlock the value of your business. And especially in the vast majority of businesses, it is all about building something. Yes, it has to work, right? That's what the CTO is thinking, but building the right thing. Right. And making sure it's going to make your end user just absolutely happy.
So true. And I love that because I think a mental block for a lot of CTOs is just tell me what to build. I'll make sure it gets built. I'll staff it. I'll make sure it happens. But I'm frustrated because no one's really giving us direction where you should say, listen, get ahead of that conversation and become part of that shortest path to finding and building the solution.
That's absolutely right. And if you just sit and wait for direction, you're going to be in trouble. So I've long been a believer that a product-minded CTO is the right path.
I love it. For me, it's like a UX UI person who can also code.
Yeah, that's right.
I love that combination.
Oh yeah, it's good.
And I think the earliest indication that you're failing as a CTO in this space or in this situation is when you start getting bored.
Yeah,
I think boredom, which is tough for creative types. I mean, I fight boredom. I'm sure you do as well. Sometimes you got to keep yourself sort of
Always moving.
on the move. And but if you're in a business and you're CTOing that business and you've been there for years and you're starting to feel like, well, I'm a little bored. I think in some cases it's probably time to move on. But in other cases, most cases, I think it's time to think, well, how am I serving my customer and what are we doing to optimize that?
That's right. And the thing is, if there's nothing more exciting for me personally as a technologist than understanding how, I'm unlocking value and creating, happiness and success for my end user, right? I think in the very early days when I was at the healthcare business, I didn't really have that connection with my end customer, right? It just wasn't there. That first, when I did ShootCube, I spent a lot of time, engaging directly with photographers, and I became, friends with a lot of these folks and understanding their business and really, building empathy for them. And I think honestly, if I had to say in terms of my core values, my core philosophy personally, as a CTO, I think the number one most important value that a CTO can hold is empathy, right? And that's true for building engineering teams. That's true for engaging with the rest of your business and your leadership. That's true for engaging with your customer. And that is if you asked a group of 100 people, kind of Family Feud style, surveyed them randomly and said, name the adjective that describes a chief technology officer, I'm guessing the empathy would not be one of the words.
And it's like the word empathy also gets thrown around like self-awareness and stuff. And empathy is actually damn hard.
It's really hard.
It's not like people say, oh, okay, we're working on emotional intelligence and self-awareness and social awareness, and those words are so easy to say, but the concepts behind that are putting yourself second and third and fourth behind other people and other concepts. Right. And that is not an easy thing to do, especially on a good day, it's hard.
Yeah.
On a bad day, it's near impossible to do because, you're just being...
That's right.
We do have a few more minutes. Is that cool?
Sure, yeah.
I want to know who put the FreeBSD sticker on your refrigerator.
I'm not sure who put the FreeBSD sticker on the refrigerator. That's probably before I started in the office.
Wow.
But yeah, I ran FreeBSD for a couple years. I ran OpenBSD for a couple years as well.
I was so my progression was basically Perl. It was in school, university, it was mostly Pascal. Then we moved to C, then Perl, and then PHP, and then I went into Ruby, Go, and now I'm really sort of enamored with Flutter.
Oh, yeah.
I'm loving Flutter.
I haven't had a chance to really play a lot.
I'm actually having sort of like, wow, this is not a fad. This is real.
Very cool.
But I built, a long story short, I built device drivers in the Unix kernel, BSD kernel, for proprietary encryption cards. And so I was in Germany, and it was, the term Macht schneller was literal. Like I was trying to squeeze the megabits through the seconds.
Yeah.
And so I was, even though our customer was commercial banking and consumer banking to try and bring banking to the browser, I was very far removed from that, much like you in the healthcare space. Yep. When I was able to move to the States in 2000, I joined a biotech company as the senior Unix administrator.
Nice.
Wow, dude. That was hard.
Yeah, I bet.
I was re-rating hard drives and upgrading Solaris systems and rebooting Exchange servers. But the one thing that I'm thankful for that time, A, I was able to come to the States. And B, I learned that unless the software you're building, the system you're configuring, the upgrade you're doing brings a smile to someone's face, it's like, why are you doing it?
Yeah.
And I learned in that moment that the simplest reboot your mail client, as idiotic as it may seem, when you see them like, oh wow, you just changed my whole day.
Yeah.
That stuff is worth it. And it shouldn't be downplayed.
Yep. And to be honest, that's the reward. The reward isn't, I did this really cool thing with technology. No. it's not because it's cool technology. It's because the technology you used did something amazing. Some of my favorite moments I've had in my life from a technologist perspective is when I've done something that on the surface is really simple. It may be 100-line script, right? But it does something that is magical to a person, right? That they go, wow, this is amazing. How did you even do this?
And what I try and do is I try and shrink when I know I'm doing something really sort of mundane to help someone, I try and shrink my thinking to 1-minute segments and just be in the moment with them.
Yeah.
And not try and think, well, this is screwing up my day or screwing up my whole month right now.
Yeah.
Can you talk about one of your customers who's one of my favorites, Subatomic?
The funny thing is, I can't talk about them for a number of reasons. But yes, that is a customer.
Well,
but
it's on your website. So.
I know. I'm actually not super closely engaged with that customer, so it's funny. I know. I would love to.
Are they in LA?
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah, I read when I went to your resources website. I read that whole story.
Yeah, it's really cool. Actually, it's a great use case. We've got a bunch of awesome stories on the website around use cases. The big challenge in the space that we're in is because we're helping other companies achieve their goals. When we want to write a use case, sometimes you get clearance, and sometimes you don't. And sometimes even if you do get clearance, there's certain things you can talk about and certain things you can't, because you want to be respectful of them and
absolutely
their business. So
pretty impressive clients. What I did love about the Subatomic story, which is on the website, was how you're able to have game developers focus on building amazing games, and then you're coming in the back end and helping it scale.
Yeah, it's funny. Just speaking more generally on the topic of gaming, that's become kind of AWS has this notion of superpowers. What's your superpower as a partner? It's kind of I don't know. I won't comment too much on how much I love that term, but regardless, one of our superpowers right now. So serverless is one of our superpowers. Containers superpower. But game tech has become a really strong point for us. And AWS has a solution called GameLift now that we've gotten to be quite good with. And it's actually a really fun space. The whole gaming, and when I say gaming, I don't necessarily mean like people think like the big console game type situations. Sure, but more like think about mobile gaming and even like Snapchat games, and it's like the new era of the Flash game. You remember the Flash games back in the 90s and or in 2000s? Now it's like Snapchat games and all of the different kind of popular chat apps have game engines now. And these things can scale to like unbelievably high. They can go completely viral, and you'll have hundreds of millions of people using them all simultaneously. So it's really cool, challenging stuff. And it's exactly the type of thing that the cloud was meant for.
Yeah, so you're basically screwed if you have a free game out there and you're a new studio and it just goes viral. Your back-end costs, your infrastructure cost will just be...
It can spiral out of control for sure. But sometimes though, that'll be kind of a strategic thing. Like you can kind of think of it as marketing investment, right? Instead of allocating, $100,000 to ad campaign,
you're just pumping it into infrastructure.
You spend $100,000 on infrastructure in a month, and you're like, wow! Now everybody knows who we are, and you've got customers, and you can go in and say, hey, cool, next game is 99 cents.
If you could point CTOs into the next 2 or 3 services from Amazon that they should go read up on or look into, regardless of industry, is there something that you kind of comes to mind for you?
That's fun. Okay, so I want to give you. There's so many things that I encourage people to check out, but I think the one that I would mention first is definitely kind of a hot one, and to me, it sort of represents the fundamental future of how we think about computing. And this is very difficult for CTOs because we all love servers, but Lambda is the number one thing that I would encourage people to start learning. Understand architecturally how you would build an application using kind of functions, and free yourself from the notion of I need to be doing this in a traditional way. And I'm not saying it's the end all be all for sure, but I have definitely, I'm a convert. I've seen the light on it in many ways. And I think I use Lambdas all the time. and there's so much you can accomplish with them. So that's one.
Just briefly,
Yeah.
your talk at 0111 was about tracking your location serverlessly.
Yes.
And it was from that talk that I got up and I went back to my machine and I created a Lambda Edge function
Nice.
on through CloudFront.
CloudFront. Mm-hmm.
And completely rethought. Like, that was such a delicious paradigm shift for me.
Yeah.
To go from my traditional API server, the data, to thinking, okay, well, I can think in terms of S3 static data and then just route traffic to it through a Lambda Edge.
Right.
That was...
It is. I definitely think if you learn Lambda deeply and you really put yourself into the mode of understanding it and understanding how you can drive it, like it's an event-driven thing, then you start to think about architectures and you tinker and play. There's lots of cool stuff you can do, and it really does impact you in a pretty deep way about how you think about how you would architect systems and applications.
The most frustrating thing for me though was deving.
Yeah.
I mean, is Lambda coding in a text area, or is that's a rookie question?
That is a rookie question, but it's a good rookie question. So you can write code in the AWS console in the little IDE that they have embedded, but
Painful.
that is not the right way to do it, generally speaking, right? So, but there are lots of great tools and frameworks out there. The one that I use most recently is called Zappa. And it's a great framework. It's specific to Python, but it's a great way to write locally and then push up, and it does all of the configuration for you. So it's sort of like infrastructure as code plus a web framework plus a bunch of other things.
Yeah, I know that stuff exists. I just haven't gotten there because I had to write my little function and then I had to deploy it to a CloudFront node, and it was like, wow.
Yeah.
And then the dev cycle would fix something, push it, wait,
it's funny. I think
cache.
that is definitely a thing with AWS is they work on the primitives. They work on the little primitives. And in terms of developer experience, a lot of times you'll read their documentation. You're like, here's the step-by-step on how to do this. And you're like, but nobody would ever do this way, ever. And it's true.
Yes.
Nobody would. But that's not the point. Their point is, we're going to build these primitives. You, the developers and the technologists, build amazing frameworks.
Build the layers on top of that.
Yeah. And so like the serverless framework, serverless.com, amazing framework, right? And it actually has, runtime support for a bunch of different programming languages, and it works with all the different cloud providers that provide functions. And so this is what's going to happen is AWS is going to continue to push out these great primitives. And I remember in the early days, you talked about Ruby. You probably got into Ruby because of Rails, right? That's probably what happened. Rails was a huge success because it was a developer experience oriented thing. And AWS developer experience is not really their thing, right? I'm not saying that they have bad developer experience necessarily, but that's not, the magic of the what was it, the 10-minute wiki? Remember that?
It's
Back
the
in the
10-minute
day?
blog, yeah.
Yeah. Or whatever. Yeah, exactly. That.
But I can see that parallel, absolutely. So
Yeah.
you're saying AWS is the Ruby to all, and Rails is the frameworks.
Exactly.
That popularizes.
Yeah, these open source communities are building amazing things on top of the primitives. And
you really shouldn't be thinking about what cloud provider you're using, right? Eventually. Is that where we're going? Is like just to send it to space and just make it work?
See, I think no, right? Because of the issue I mentioned earlier, which is each one of these guys has a totally different strength, right? And that's going to be true always. So
always?
I think always.
2 to 3 years from now?
Yeah,
Some
I do.
sort of amalgamation?
And just because there's going to be new services, like we're still at the tip of the iceberg here, right? It's, will there be aspects that you can just move around? Sure. But I think, I do think it's important to understand what the cloud providers do.
Do you think that capitalism is going to drive these providers to constantly try and lock you into their services or their platforms or their infrastructures?
I mean,
is it inherently designed to do that?
See, I would call it, if I were in their shoes, I would call it stickiness, right? See, everybody else, you call it stickiness, right? I think it's so funny. You talk to a CTO who has an app, and they're like, "Oh, let's develop stickiness. We've got this stickiness, but I don't want to be locked into my cloud provider." It's like, well, look, you can't have it. You had to have it both ways here, right? Yeah. Yes, there is, differentiated services create stickiness, or if you want, lock in. But look, most of the time,
I hear you.
Yeah, it's not your issue. It's not your problem.
What is another one or two AWS services that you feel CTOs? It's coming down the hill. It's brand new, maybe.
Yeah.
You might think it's nothing now, but you see this coming down with a force.
So I'll talk about a collection of services, and that is, so we talked about machine learning. Machine learning is an extremely complex discipline that came out of academia. And so it's unlike most other kind of categories of service or of technology that you can go on to AWS and get, right? Because it's not one thing, it's 1,000 things that are all glued together. So I think the interesting thing is, if you want to be able to take advantage of machine learning, the AWS has a series of services that are based upon machine learning that give you the capabilities and the benefits of machine learning without having to be a TensorFlow expert, for example, or an Apache MXNet or whatever it is. You don't have to build models. You don't have to do any of that. You can if you want to, right? Which I would encourage people to understand that. But there's a category of services. For example, one of the ones that I'm really intrigued by is called Recommend, that they just announced at the last reInvent in November. And Recommend is essentially a or a machine learning based recommendation engine. So you can feed it data and say, okay, for example, let's say I have an e-commerce web application that I've built, and I want to get the same kind of great recommendations that Amazon gives their customers to my customers. Well, you can do that with Recommend by feeding it in, here are things that this person has purchased, or here are things that they have liked or added to their wish list or whatever, and here's things that they have viewed and so on and so forth. And then you've got your whole rest of your product catalog, and it'll give you, lists of recommendations based on levels of confidence and so on. So that's a really cool one. And there's a lot of services like that they have. They've got everything from, recognition and, image processing, video processing, some of the elemental services. So a lot of these things have AI and machine learning built in. And I think that's a great way to get started, because you can start unlocking the value and be pragmatic about it. And then maybe the last one that I'll talk about, is probably, I think people, think that, some of the kind of glue services are not very interesting, but it turns out they actually are quite interesting. So the API gateway is a really great service to understand. And if you're using Lambdas, being able to trigger them through the API gateway is pretty awesome. And being able to do things like build REST web services out of Lambdas, pretty cool. So API gateway is one that I would encourage people to understand. It allows you to do a lot of really interesting things. Athena is really cool, being able to actually run SQL queries against your S3 data. Pretty cool.
Yeah, first time I heard of that was at that conference. I was like, wow, this is
neat.
Prolific.
There's so much cool stuff.
So before I let you go, I do want to ask you about your. So first of all, when CTOs brand themselves, or they don't brand themselves.
Yeah.
They don't go and speak. They don't really maintain a healthy, to some it's just basically updating their LinkedIn profiles.
Right.
When I look at your website, I just see this just unbridled enthusiasm and joy of sort of trying out new things, building things. And honestly, I would encourage people to go to cleverdevil.io.
Yeah.
And I spent some time on it, and I found like it was so just...
Yeah.
And if I, so just as a thought exercise, if I were considering a technical co-founder or a CTO, and I look at your website, I'll be like, holy moly's.
Yeah.
This is the kind of person who is actively, and it doesn't seem like you're doing it for any other reason than pure enjoyment.
It is. It is pure enjoyment, right? And I think, to me, it's all about, like, if you look at how most people experience technology these days, it's through social media. Right, that's how they experience technology, and that's sort of great, and also sort of a shame, because at the end of the day, they're kind of giving that experience away to somebody else. And I'm a big believer in like owning your own information and kind of owning that experience, especially as a technologist. And so, yeah, I have a website. I'm one of the few. It's a blog, right? But it's more than that. It's a repository of data. So I send my location tracking information up into there. I have all of my history of what I've been watching from a TV and movie perspective. I've got podcasts I've been listening to. I've got locations that I've checked into. I've got recipes. I've got everything on there.
And the one question you answer on the side, like why is tracking important?
Yeah.
Is basically this concept of preserving your memories.
Yeah.
I think that's
digital preservation, right? Like I think one of the biggest hooks that Facebook has into people is that, right? They own people's memories. And I loved the whole thing where it would be, hey, remember this 1 year ago? Remember this 5 years ago? And I was like, gosh, I want that, but I really don't want to give it to Facebook. Like, you know, I'm not a huge fan of theirs. I think they have been fairly damaging. And so I've deleted my Facebook account and encourage many other people to do the same. But that doesn't mean you have to give up that experience, right? So, you know, I've built a bunch of things into my website I have like a monthly summary feature I just added where I can go in and say, hey, what did my month look like in January of 2017?
Yeah.
And I can see all the photos that I posted.
I looked at January 2018.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's lots of cool stuff. And it does make you remember. And, you know, I have 2 kids and I want to cherish the memories I have with them.
And the purpose of putting it on the web though?
Well,
versus just keeping a little private repository, or
I want to be able to access it from anywhere. I want to be able to aggregate information from anywhere. And just because it's on the web doesn't necessarily mean it's public. So when I look at my summary pages, I see a lot more than you see, right? So
when you're logged in, and
that's right.
Okay,
and you can, you know, different people can make different choices there. I'm comfortable sharing photos publicly, right? I also keep journals, personal private journals. So I write them on my iPhone. I've written a little thing that I can, you know, take journals and mark down, and I tap a button and it publishes to my website privately in a special category. Are you hosting it
on your own hard drive?
Yeah, I actually host it all on a Raspberry Pi that is battery powered, runs in my pocket. No, it's all up in AWS. Shocker of all shockers. S3 for a data lake and RDS for my database.
No, it's inspirational. I think both from allowing yourself to tinker with tools in a productive way, i.e., preserving memories.
Yeah.
While also branding who you are and what you love,
right?
And keeping it all inside of this, you know, domain that you quasi own.
Yeah, that's right.
Just to wrap up, IndieWeb.
Yes.
What is that?
So IndieWeb is a community, indieweb.org, that is really where I was mostly inspired about this. I've had a website for a long, long time, but it had really stagnated. I've actually had multiple different websites under different domains. And IndieWeb is a group that really values this notion of owning your own data and controlling it. It's sort of a reaction to the social media kind of silo kind of activity that's happened. And if you actually look at the diversity of the internet, of the web, over the past 10 years, it's actually sort of decreased because now there's more traffic than ever, but it's going to fewer and fewer locations, right? It's going to mostly Facebook, Twitter, Google, whatever. And this is sort of a notion of not necessarily bringing back the old blog kind of universe, but at the same time, it's more like shifting your focus and your mindset to one where it's not that these things are necessarily bad or evil. They don't have to be. I mean, sometimes the companies are, right? But it's about what if they go away? How many times have you seen, do you remember MySpace was enormous, right? And if you had a whole big amount of memories on MySpace and now it's gone, right? Tumblr is sort of a thing that people, you know, used to do a lot of. Flickr has changed hands 9 times now. And for all of those that have, you know, kind of risen and fallen, there's been a bunch that have just completely disappeared and all of that content is gone forever. And that's sort of sad. So IndieWeb is a community of like-minded people who want to, you know, either reap the benefits of technologies that will allow them to own their own data and own their own information, or are actually builders like myself who are creating standards and tools that enable people to do that.
Yeah, I love the idea of putting out your web presence and having the masses come to you.
Yeah.
But the human, the Homo sapiens seems to want to centralize. Like all beauty starts with the decentralization.
Right.
And everyone's so youthful and innocently joyful about what this can do.
I know.
And then there's this entropy towards a freaking central
convenience. Yeah, it is. It's about convenience. But here's the thing: it doesn't have. You can have both, right? You can have a centralized index of a decentralized system, and to me, that is what the web should be, right? We should each have our own presence that is ours, and we control
Such a firm believer in that.
And it should be connected into a bunch of centralized indexes for different reasons.
But then I would have to teach my mom, who's a prolific Facebook user, how to manage your own website?
Well, in the indie web community, we have this thing called generations, right? So there's generation 1, generation 2, generation 3, generation 4. Generation 1 is like the builders, right? The people who are writing the code and building the standards and prototyping out what is necessary to be able to have your own web presence that gives you lots of these capabilities. Generation 3, generation 4 is like your mom, right? She just wants to sign up for a service and use it. And you can build services that are respectful of these indie web principles and respectful of people's privacy and encourage them to own their data. One of the best examples of this is a service called micro.blog that you may have heard of. It's actually created by a guy named Manton Rees. He, was pretty well known in like the Apple iOS kind of Mac development, iOS development land. And he's built out a blog and hosting service that is centralized, but is built on some of the same indie web principles and lets you own your own data. It lets you federate and with like ActivityPub and Mastodon and all that. It lets you reply to my website, and I'll actually see your reply on my site, and I can reply to you, and it integrates really well. So it's that centralized, decentralized kind of thing. And other ones of these are going to pop over time. There are ways to do it, to create these generation 3, generation 4 tools that enable, your average person to get the benefits.
So if I'm philosophically drawn to that, indie web isn't just a sort of a set of principles. You're actually building tools and enabling generation 3 and 4 to
That's
actually...
the ultimate goal. It's not, going back to being a technologist, it's not just to do something cool because it's cool. Ultimately, we want the whole world to have access to this stuff.
That sounds like something that I definitely...
It's awesome. It's a great community. IRC channel for our channels that you can join, or a Slack bridge. I join through Slack because I have to have Slack running anyway. And if I'm going to give up half my memory on my laptop, I might as well consolidate all of my chat in one place. Very welcoming community. Definitely recommend getting engaged if you're a CTO and you have the idea that you want to have a web presence.
This was wonderful.
Yeah, it's fun.
Can I take the FreeBSD sticker? Or?
If you can scrape it off the fridge, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jonathan. It was really fantastic.
Pleasure.
And hopefully to talk to you soon again.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Cheers,
all
man.
Right. Cheers.
Have you chatted with a CTO lately? Hi, thank you for listening to the CTO Studio. If you don't mind, take a quick second and please rate and review the show. It helps us a lot. Go to the ctostudio.com for more information on what we're doing at 7 CTOs. We also have a video or two for you that could be a helpful resource for you as you're managing your company. So thank you for listening.